Hello, welcome back to Behind the Fade, the channel where we talk about all aspects of live sound mixing and live sound in general. Today I want to talk about speech, which is arguably not the most fun part of this job, but I would guess that most of you who do this for a living will have to do a good share of this. For myself, even though I've got to do so many touring, I did so many concerts and festivals, so much music, but still I would guess that 50% of my jobs were at least involving speech or all about speech. For example, for 15 years in a row, I did at least 3 big shareholders meetings in Germany. One of them always being Deutsche Bank, which is probably was the biggest shareholders meeting in Germany. Why do I say it was? Well, when COVID hit, they all went online, and once they were online, they stayed online. Today I don't want to get very technical really. I want to talk about the right mindset behind it and the right approach. Because if you know my channel, you heard me talk about the misuse or overuse of all the toys and things in modern consoles. And the same goes for speech. I've seen it so often that people now build monsters of a plugin chain just for speech with I don't know, multiband compression and dynamic EQ and some kind of exciter and all kinds of stuff. And I think they do that because they have the wrong goal, you know, which is to deliver the most polished voice that you ever heard. But that's not the goal, really. I mean, okay, if you are working in the same room over and over again, and even with the same group of people, maybe you do like a company meeting on a regular basis, and you might even have rehearsals, and you have fun in trying to fine-tune these voices a little bit more every time you do them. Well, welcome. Nothing wrong with it. But the usual situation is that you do an event and random people walk up to the microphone and start to talk. Some of them know how to do that, others not so much. Your goal is to make these voices as intelligible as possible quickly. Because what everybody wants is they want to understand what's being said. Nobody wants to listen to you dialing in the EQ forever, go. Nobody wants that. However, there's, of course, between get there quickly and then leave it alone and keep dialing in the EQ forever, there's a gray area. Of course, once you settle the basic sound quickly, and you hear that there's a little bit more to do. Maybe it's you have enough headroom so you can introduce a compressor, maybe you need a de-esser, and maybe the vocal sounds pretty harsh, so you need to engage another EQ band or even a dynamic EQ. Do it, but that should be done really slowly and carefully, so the average listener doesn't really notice that you're doing something. Okay, so get the basic sound real quickly and everything else subtle, slowly. And actually, I will, not in this video, but I will show you an EQ default that makes it really easy to get to a good result really quickly. Ask yourself, if when you go somewhere to listen to somebody talking about a topic that you're really interested in, maybe on a trade show or whatever it is, and you are a sound engineer yourself, but is your first concern the way that voice sounds? Or are you happy enough if you can understand well what's being said? For me, it was always the second. But then some people argue, yeah, but it's been recorded. Well, that's one more reason to do it the way I just said, because let's say there's a local radio station and maybe they're broadcasting a few sentences out of the beginning of that speech. Even more on the radio, nobody wants to hear you dialing in your EQ. They rather live with a voice that doesn't sound ideal. They just want to understand what's being said. So if you take this polishing approach, it's really kind of just for yourself. Although, little disclaimer here, there's probably one group of people that are interested in that, and that's like the agency that hired you, or the company you're working for, or the boss of a company that you're working for. They might be there to also judge your work. But even these people do not want to see you wolf down on the EQ forever and getting lost in your massive plugin chain trying to polish this voice the best possible. So maybe keep this in mind. Think about it. Before we talk about the mixing, we should talk about the microphones that are being used for speech and their pros and cons. First up, the cruel truth is there's no perfect mic for speech. They all have their pros and their cons. So let's start with the normal handheld mic, like this. For many engineers, it's their favorite choice, me being one of them for a long time, because you don't have to attach something to somebody. You can just hand it over, and you have a lot of gain before feedback. The problem is these mics are great as long as the person using it has the slightest idea how to use it. For example, of course, the gain before feedback comes from the proximity effect of the microphone. And if now somebody holds it way too far away, now this is working against you, because all you got is a very thin signal, and you have to crank up the gain, and you might still run into feedback. Then people might even move the mic around or doing this instead of this. So you got all the plosives. It can turn into a nightmare if the person doesn't know how to handle a microphone. And even have the chance to talk to them, I mean yourself or the guy who's in charge of miking, talk to the people and explain how to use a mic. If they're nervous and new to this, they might forget within seconds. So they might start the right way and then they go this, not even noticing what that does to their voice, because they trust that the sound engineer can fix all that. So I sometimes, when I get to talk to people, I try to use terms that will maybe stick with them a little longer, so they might remember for a longer period of time. For example, if you hold a mic, think of a beer bottle, not an ice cream cone. Of course, terms like this are not appropriate for any situation. You might work that out yourself. If I imagine like a 25-year-old sound engineer telling this to a 65-year-old CEO, it might not be the best idea. So, summary for handheld mics: perfect as long as the person using it knows what he's doing, at least halfway. Another point when it comes to handheld mics is which is the best mic for this. Many people prefer condenser capsules because they're a bit more sensitive. But the problem is that a lot of these mics have like an extended high end, which sounds helpful in theory, but it isn't really. So my favorite choice is really the good old Shure SM58. But then again, there's so many new mics out there that I've probably never heard about. Let me know, what's your favorite when it comes to handheld speech mics? Next up, headsets. When it comes to headsets, and by the way, I can only talk about DPA headsets because that's the only headset mic I've been using or even seen for decades, for ages. That's the headset of choice for every company I work for, and it's all I see on television. So it's the only thing I can talk about. I don't know any other headsets. So headsets, when it comes to the mixing, they're probably the best choice because they're sitting on people's heads. The people don't have to know anything about using a microphone. So perfect. But the cons are there's just so much to know around it. First of all, you have to put it on people. You have to get into somebody's hairdo and attach this microphone, something I always hated. Fortunately, most of the time, somebody is doing it for me. So then you know how to put it on without annoying people. So you have to practice it a little, knowing about the mechanics. It's a bit fiddly, if that is that even a word. Also, here's an important soft skill. When you're in charge of putting headsets onto people's heads, Make sure you've got really clean hands, you smell nice, and you don't have bad breath or anything like that. Sounds silly, but it's somewhat important. Then again, yeah, if a woman wears long earrings, she will have to take them out. You have to stay away from beards. Then there's also the choice between cardioid and omnidirectional headsets. So the people that plan the equipment will often go for cardioid, thinking they're just easier to handle because more gain before feedback and a louder signal, which is kind of true. But then again, with a cardioid headset, you have to be really careful about the placement of the capsule. An omnidirectional mic is much more forgiving when it comes to that. And also, it sounds so much more open that sometimes the voice is more intelligible even at a lower volume. Most of the time, I would prefer omnidirectional, really. But there's more. Now, if you have a woman with a very tiny neck, then it's really difficult to put it on because you can't get it together close enough. Although there is a way to kind of bend a girly headset, but I forgot how that goes. Or the opposite, you have men with no neck, and now the entire headset is too small, and the capsule ends up somewhere in the back here. So there's all kinds of obstacles when it comes to putting on a headset. Even once you've done that, in a situation where somebody gets mic'd, but then sits in the audience for a while until it is his turn to go up there. In the meantime, he might have touched his face in any way, and without noticing it, now the microphone is somewhere in space. So, meaning, if you have a scenario like that, somebody should be in charge of controlling every speaker right before he goes on, if the microphone is still in a useful position. But once this is all out of the way, now it's easier to handle than any other mic when it comes to just mixing it. Next up, clip mics, which for me is the worst. First of all, the placement. I know usually they are attached to like a jacket, like somewhere here, which is the best compromise between getting some volume and some coverage. Now, if that doesn't work, but you don't know in front, you need to hear that person talk, and you would even need to know how this person behaves on stage to decide about the best placement. Like if I know somebody has a weak voice, I would sometimes attach it to like a knot of the tie pointing outwards. But now, yes, you get more signal, but now you get a lot of this, and no compressor can work against that. So placement is a problem. Then there's also cardioid and omnidirectional, but a cardioid in this situation with a mic down here, and it's so easy to move so it shoots in completely the wrong direction. Cardioid clip mics to me are a bit like Russian roulette. I don't recommend it at all. But now you attached it, and now the person sits down maybe, and now not only can the mic move with the clothing can touch the mic, or now the tie can touch the mic. So many obstacles. I only use clip mics if I really have to because the client insists and there's no way to talk him out of it. Oh, and there's also another aspect. It doesn't happen very often, but it does happen. I'm not making this up. If you have like a bigger event sort of thing with a lot of speakers, then you will have one or two techs in charge of handling the mics. So they might have a table somewhere and people come to them and get their mics and they turn them afterwards. Unless you have some important CEOs or celebrities that cannot be bothered doing that, these people will be mic'd in their dressing room or something. But that's the usual procedure. There's this miking table. And what can happen with a clip mic is a speaker comes off the stage and immediately gets drawn into a conversation with somebody. All of a sudden realizing he's running out of time, he's got a flight to catch, and off he goes to the airport with a mic still on him. I'm not making this up. This has happened. And of course, then there are people that are in charge to collect the mics, but then maybe in this situation, the guy doesn't want to interrupt the conversation. But then he has some other stuff to do and plans to come back. And when they look at it again, the person's gone. It has happened. It's just a little thing, but another disadvantage of a clip mic. So for me, they are the worst. If you disagree, let me know. Tell me your experience with it. And lastly, Lectors mics. Sometimes you have a desk with one Lectors mic like this, which can only be problematic if the person talking really doesn't know what to do. Like you might have seen, I've seen award shows where like rock stars got an award and then they treated this lector mic like a handheld and really talked into it like that. And that's, of course, sounds horrible. Like they clip the capsule, plosives all over the place. But if somebody stands in front of it in a normal manner, it's usually okay. Very often you will have a desk with two mics like this. So it covers more area and one can always act as a replacement for the other one, like a spare. Now, the problem with two mics is you can't just bring them up on the same level because then you will have a hell of a phasing unless the speaker is exactly in the center between them and stays there. Any other way it will phase because now the voice reaches one microphone earlier than the other one. It's logical, right? So what can you do? Well, nowadays, most of the time you will have an auto mixer in your desk and that's problem solved. If not, there's this old method of you take one microphone, 6 dB, at least 6 dB down, and now the phasing is still there in theory, but it's not as audible anymore. In fact, it's almost non-audible. What I sometimes tried for a while was I would pick the mic that sounded better for some reason. I mean, it's the same type of mic, same EQ, and yet one sounded better than the other. I would pick the one that sounded better, and then I would low cut the other one so severely that it only could pick up like meaning if this is my main mic and this is my SS mic, only when somebody turned around all the way to this side, then the main mic wouldn't be able to pick up the sibilant sounds anymore. So then the other mic would come into play, but that did not always work. So it's worth trying, but the thing is, if it doesn't work, all you do is take your low cut and put it down to normal and you're back in the game. So Lectors mics are reasonably easy to handle, I think. And there's also most common mics to be used, like the DPAs as a headset, are Sennheiser ME36. That's what I see the most. And there's one more aspect to them because they have this grid on the capsule. And this grid is supposed to make the microphone pretty deaf from that side. And there's a whole philosophy about how to adjust these grids. And some people think they should go downwards, so to minimize reflections from the desk. Other people think they should be facing each other. Other people think they should be facing outwards for whatever reason. I could never really figure it out from theory. What I always do is I ask somebody just to check it out for me. So try downwards, try all four directions, and just listen what sounds best to me. It takes a minute, and then you just, That's Lectors mics, but I want to do a kind of honorable mention, just for your knowledge base so you know these mics exist. Look at this. This is a picture from the German Bundestag from speaker's perspective in the plenary hall. And these strange things on your left and your right are the microphones. And I'm telling you this, you might never get your hands on them. I got to use them once in my entire career. And those are Microtech Fell KAM970. And they're most interesting because what they do, they work like the opposite of a line array. So they have a couple of capsules in them. So their coverage is really precise, and that's why they can work from so far away from the speaker. So just because now you've heard of them, I don't think you will ever get to use them. And that's pretty much it. If I ever forgot something or you disagree with something, or want to tell me something, please, I love comments. We finally get to mixing speech. I will show you how I approach mixing speech and my setup and my default EQ. I introduce you to one very helpful plugin when it comes to speech. First of all, the system. If let's say we have an event with unrehearsed speakers with unknown ability to talk to people through a microphone. So I think it's a pretty common setup. Now, even if an event is supposed to be a speech-only event, I will never EQ the entire system just for speech because clients are unpredictable. Yes, it may seem like there's only speech, but there might be like a last-minute decision to show a video with audio, or they want to play a certain song for motivation or whatever it is. Things can always come up, so you have to be prepared. So what I'll do, I will send all my speech microphones down a subgroup, a mono subgroup, and that subgroup I will EQ for speech, meaning maybe clear out some muddiness up front or find some difficult frequencies when it comes to feedback, that type of thing. And by the way, there will be, if I have it available, there will be one plugin on the subgroup. We'll come to that in a minute, but there will be no further processing, no dynamics, no polishing plugins, whatever it is. Because if things get difficult, you don't want any of that in your way, because you might need any last dB of headroom and gain before feedback. And everything that deals with compression or polishes something like an exciter or something, it all reduces your gain before feedback. Of course, on my channel, there will be a de-esser prepared and a compressor prepared, but the threshold will be wide open, so it doesn't do anything unless I introduce it to the signal. So when it comes to the EQ, I told you the goal is to come to a good result really quickly, and then any further processing you will do like subtle and slowly, so nobody can really hear that you're still working on it. So I developed an EQ setting that allows me to do so. So usual EQs that I see look maybe like this, or like this, or like this. Of course, I just made these up in actual EQ settings that I saw, but they might look something like that. So these all look like they started from scratch, and it took them a little while to dial these EQs in. If I have a handheld mic to mix, I will probably start from scratch. I'll leave the EQ flat, give it a low cut, and start from there. That works just fine. But for everything else, for lectors mics, headsets, clip mics, that's my default EQ that I always use for speech. There's a low cut at 190 Hertz. That looks pretty drastic, but honestly, from a lectors mic or a clip mic, there's not a lot going on below that, at least nothing useful. For a headset, you might reduce that a little bit. Then I have a high cut. In this case, it's 6.7K. Also looks drastic, but it works. And you can, even if you have a really difficult room with a lot of potential of high frequency feedback, you can even reduce that down to like 5. Oh, wrong here. You can reduce it down to like 5.6 or so. It will still work. We're still able to detect the S's and everything, but that would be then the most drastic setting. But now, here, I have this big bump around 500 Hertz, and most of the time to get to a good result quickly, all you have to do is you have to move around this filter a little, maybe reduce it a little, anything like that in this area. And that will most of the time give you a good result within seconds. And if after that you still hear problems like the voice is very harsh or very nasally, then you still have a few EQ bands available like this one that you then can introduce in a subtle way and slowly, so nobody can really hear that you're still working on the EQ. Okay, now let me tell you about one really useful plugin to go into that speech chain. Just a bit of history. Around 2016, 2017, a revolutionary hardware unit came onto the market, which was called the Cedar DNS8. Here's a little picture of it. It was very, very expensive. Actually, when it came out, it was around like €6,500 or so. And now, when I looked for this picture, uh, there's a price tag next to it saying it's close to €10,000 now. So, and this unit was not so expensive because of any components built into it. It was the algorithm that came with it. And the algorithm, of course, until this day is secret. Nobody knows what it does or how it works. But what it apparently does is it measures the incoming signal, and it works out which part of that signal is a direct signal and what part of the signal is a reflection. So what it does with it is it dries out the room around the signal, and it does it all by itself. You have a learn button, and now all the room around your voice is gone. And that was pretty fantastic. I mean, you can make a headset sound like a handheld, and a clip mic sound like a headset. It was pretty amazing, but it was very expensive, and very few people had it. And there's also a plug-in version, the DNS1, but that's only for Pro Tools, and you can't just buy it. Why am I telling you this? There is one plugin, at least in the Yamaha world, I'm not sure if it's available anywhere else, which is called the Primary Source Expander, PSE. This thing has a different technology. It works in a different way, but it does something like the same thing. It's not as easy, but it's worth learning this plugin a little and fiddling with it and see how it works. And this would be the one plugin that's still sitting on my speech chain on my subgroup, because it really makes a difference. And that's already what I have to say about actually mixing speech. So today I want to talk about the biggest mistakes I always made mixing speech, so you don't have to make these mistakes yourself. And the first one is already a big one, and I made this mistake for way too long and far too often. And that mistake is not to have a volume strategy for your event. I mean, we're talking about speech events with mixed microphone types and all that, so normal run-of-the-mill. Let me give you a scenario. An event like that very often starts with the video that's being played. And very often the client may ask you to play that video pretty loud, so the people in the room know that the event starts, and there might be people still outside of the room to let them know to come in because the event starts. And very often in this video there will be an off voice, a well-produced, polished, strong off voice. So after the video there might be a host coming on stage, probably using a headset if he needs to read something, or if not, very often a handheld mic, because these people are usually kind of pro speakers, so they know that a clip mic is not the best choice, but they don't want to wear a headset all day because they're only coming up every once in a while for a few minutes, so they choose a handheld very often. And this host will also have a strong, trained voice. He knows how to handle a microphone, and his voice will, of course, not be as strong as the one in the video before, but still, you think, well, easy enough. It's ideal. Strong voice, handheld mic, and you go for it. Now the host announces the CEO of the company wearing a clip mic. And now the CEO comes on, and he's probably also an experienced speaker, but he has a clip mic. So his voice will be so weak against the host with his handheld mic. And now while you're trying to work on it, so you wolf down on the EQ, trying to kind of make it somewhat better, then hell breaks loose around you, because the intercom will ring, somebody at the other end telling you, you need to turn this guy up, while somebody is tapping you on the shoulder, probably guys from the agency, or your boss, or somebody. They will all be standing around you telling you to turn this guy up. So as if they don't trust you to hear that yourself, and as if they don't see that you're already working on it. So they interrupt your work even more. So the situation can become really ugly, even for your career if you're very unlucky. So how to avoid this? as much as possible. Let's try. Let's start with this video. When the client comes up with a video and asks you to play it really loud, you need to talk to him about that. And if the event is bigger and there's another hierarchy going on and you're not in the position to talk to the clients, then talk to your production manager, your technical director, whoever it is. Somebody needs to talk to somebody about how this is not a good idea to play that video really loud. You can turn it up somewhat, but not really loud, and you have to put your foot down a little. Now you may argue, they might think it's just me who's not capable of bringing up the voices loud enough so they can compete with the video. Yes, but this situation that you tell somebody something about physics, about limitations of something is not going to work, there will always people thinking that it's your fault and you are just not good enough to do it. That will happen to you all over the place. And this only gets better over time with more experience and more people that know you and trust you. Well, that's no reason to not even try to convince people and let them know what's going to happen and why this is not a good idea. At least you have to try. So let's say you play the video, not too loud, but loud enough, and now the host comes on stage. Now, first of all, I told you in another video that when I use handhelds for speech, I very often start with a flat EQ and just a low cut, but not if I have an event with mixed mics. I told you I have a subgroup with all mics going down that subgroup. And by the way, of course, you can have multiple subgroups if you want to. You can have a subgroup for clip mics and one for Lectus mics and one for headsets. For me, it just turned out that all my default EQs on all these mics will look pretty much the same. So I use one subgroup, but I will also send handheld mics down that subgroup. Why? Well, while the subgroup will make this handheld mic sound worse, if you will, because there will be a lot of cleanup in the low mids and taking out frequencies that are difficult or dangerous. And the handheld mic will not need all this or most of this, so it will sound thinner than it could sound, but it sounds closer to the headsets and the clip mics. That's your goal. You make the handheld mic sound worse, but you make it sound closer to the result that you will get from a headset or a clip mic. So now the host comes on stage and starts talking. It will still now, even especially with this EQ and the subgroup, it will sound a lot thinner and smaller than this voice in the video, but that's something that usually people can grasp immediately. So I never had a complaint about something like that. So now you bring him up to a certain level. I mean, just imagine it's the beginning of the show. People are probably still talking to each other, mumbling around. So you bring him up loud enough so it's intelligible. And now, so as he speaks, usually what happens is people start focusing, stop talking to each other. The entire room gets quieter. And now what you do is you reduce the volume of that speaker ever so slowly, a little bit with every sentence. It becomes quieter and quieter, of course still intelligible, and people get more focused. By the end of this process, you probably have them at a level that kind of matches the level of that clip mic that follows when the CEO comes on stage. It will, of course, sound more roomy and even thinner and everything, but you need to get it somewhere in the ballpark. That's important. And you have to keep that volume strategy. This clip mic is now your level. If you have people on headsets, you bring them down on that level. Everybody else. This does not guarantee that this will run effortless through the entire day, but it's a good start. And if later in that day you have somebody on stage who's really so quiet, maybe again on a clip mic and really just mumbling, at least people around you, the agency and everybody has gained some trust in you. So they will not come up to you telling you to bring that speaker up. They might even go and approach the speaker himself or herself to tell him or her to speak up a little. And also there could be somebody talking to speakers that are obviously unexperienced and just tell them to speak up a little. Talk to the people like you don't have a microphone. And if that raises their voice a little bit, that already helps. The thing is, if you come to the very quiet range of the human voice, then the difference between mumbling like this and speaking like this is already a world when you amplify that. A good example for this is I used to tour with David Copperfield as a system engineer back in the late 90s or so, the magician or illusionist, or whatever you want to call him. And David used to mumble a lot, especially when it was the matinee show and he was not yet really awake and on autopilot. His voice was really, really, really quiet. And of course, he was not the guy that anybody could step up to and ask him to speak up a little. So when you went to certain arenas like the Palau Sant Jordi, or how you ever pronounce that, in Barcelona, it's a 17,000 seat arena with a very challenging acoustics. And knowing that maybe in these days David was sometimes in a bad mood, they would bring in an entire truck of additional PA just to cover the difference between this and this. So if he talked like this, it was a problem. When he talked like this, it was all okay. It comes to show you this difference can become really expensive. So let's talk about mistakes I made in preparation or in the sound check, if you will. Most of the time, you will need a dummy speaker. I mean, nowadays, I'm kind of, if it's not too big, I'm kind of in a situation where I can work it out by myself. I can put on even a clip mic at the front of house in front of the speakers and bring it up so it just doesn't feedback, and dial in some kind of EQ, and then walk on stage with my tablet and then bring up the channel a little bit more until I hear the first feedback, and then maybe take out the one or two frequencies that feedback the most and just kind of take it from that. But when it comes to bigger events, you need a dummy speaker, and there's quite a few mistakes you can make with a dummy speaker. First of all, you need to find somebody who's available, or sometimes there is even only just one person available for this. And if this person is unexperienced and not really confident to talk, first thing that's going to happen is he's going to walk on stage with the microphone and saying things like, yeah, I'm checking this mic for front of house, don't really know what to say. Are you done? Oh, yeah, one, two, it's really difficult to come up with something to say. Are you done? It goes on and on and on. Bottom line is, give the guy something to read, or tell him to grab a smartphone, find an article, preferably about something harmless, not necessarily a political statement about something, you never know who's listening, and read it. Read it like a speaker. Because the next mistake that I see happening all the time, and it happened to me far too many times, and I let it slip because I didn't think about it, very often this dummy speaker will then go like, I'm speaking very quietly on purpose so you can work out your limits and see how far you can get. That's bullshit. Because what always happened was I was bending the EQ and trying to get it as loud as I could. Most of the time not very satisfying, but I could get it any louder. And then sometimes that resulted in a sleepless night before the event. But at the end of the day, everybody who was speaking in this event was a lot louder than this dummy speaker. But now that I dialed in this impossible EQ, they all sounded like Mickey Mouse. So it doesn't work that way. So what you do is you have the guy talk in a normal way, even speak up just like a real speaker. And maybe at the end of it, when you're done with all that, you can tell him to kind of talk quietly and see how far you can get, and then maybe prepare an EQ and frequencies that are likely to feedback without really engaging them. Just prepare the frequency. And that should be good enough. Another thing you should do, you should have the guy walk the stage. Because very often, especially with clip mics, there are areas that are more dangerous than other areas. For example, in the center of the stage where left PA and right PA, well, for you it's the other way around, add up. That might be a dangerous spot, or at some, you never know about the reflections that are going on. So have him walk the stage with this microphone. Remember the spots that are dangerous. So what you can do now is, if a speaker walks into these spots, you can use your pan, just pan him over the other side a little bit, see if that works. And another mistake, I just touched this already before. Make sure, if you don't know about the speakers that you're going to get, make sure you get a chance to brief them, yourself or the miking guy, or whoever. At least try to gather them all and do a quick briefing about how to hold a microphone. Tell them to, like I said before, speak up, speak to the audience like there's no microphone. Tell the people that are wearing headsets and are mic'd well before their time to go on, to try to be aware of the fact that if they touch their face in any way, they might bend the microphone out of the way. Although I told you in another video, there should always be somebody checking these headsets mics right before people get on stage. That's, again, this is a very crucial point. A lot of these people might forget everything you told them, but it's worth a try. So finally, let's get to some technical mistakes I made. First of all, always switch on power lock on the microphones and the transmitters. And the thing is, all I work with usually is Shure or Sennheiser. If you use other brands that might not have a power lock, but maybe you can put some tape over the on-off switch or anything. But you should avoid that the people on stage can switch on and off their mics themselves, because all kind of weird thing can happen. Like somebody goes on stage with a handheld, and maybe you miss the first second, you miss your cue. So the guy on stage will immediately think the mic is not switched on, and if he has the switch right there, he will switch it off while he wants to switch it on. If you happen to have a short dropout or something, then some people start playing with the on-off switch for some reason. So if you have a power lock, use it. And when you check the RF coverage of the stage, yourself or somebody else, that person should always try a handheld and cover the antenna at the bottom, because a lot of speakers hold a microphone like this while they cover the antenna. That is as much as I can think of right now. If you have got something or you have further questions, write it in the comments. Or if you have a lot of questions, then consider booking a coaching call. I offer these now. That's it for today. Bye-bye.